As I said earlier, it's annual meeting Sunday again at the Unity Church of Central Massachusetts, as we do every year in the month of February. I thought, some of you thought it was Super Bowl Sunday, but it's annual Sunday here at our church. And annual meetings are a time where you sort of take stock of what you've accomplished in the previous year, and you look ahead to the new year with lots of hope and faith and confidence and assurance that great things are going to happen. And it's also a time to talk about vision. About the vision of this church, about the vision that we hold in our own lives, for our lives. So I thought I would begin the discussion on Annual Sunday about vision right here, right now, during this lesson. And I want to cover a lot of territory in a little time. I always do that, right, to you? But I promise I'm going to try to be brief, like about 15 to 20 minutes brief. Because I want to briefly touch on what was the vision of the co-founders of Unity, of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. What was the vision of Jesus the Christ and his ministry? I want to share a little bit my vision in ministry. I realize I've probably talked to a lot of you individually about my vision in ministry, but I don't think I've ever done it from the pulpit, as they would say. And I want to talk about what is the vision of this church and what is the vision of the Unity movement today. So, a lot of territory to cover, would you say? They say never do this when you're writing a talk, Claudia, okay? Pick one point, stick to it, keep going back to it, re-emphasize it, but you're grown up, you can take 10 points, okay. So here we go. I'll keep it brief. Now, how many of you were here when we did the Unity play, How Unity Began? How many saw that projection? Great. Well, the play briefly described the start of Unity, focusing basically on the facts of the story, looking at Myrtle Fillmore, that she was the wife of Charles Fillmore, the mother of 3 children, that she was seriously ill with TB, basically had just a short time to live. Those days very serious, probably today as well. And that she attended this New Thought lecture given by Dr. E.B. Weeks, where she heard this affirmation that changed her life, right? I'm a child of God, therefore I do not inherit sickness. So it focused on the facts about her healing and how Unity was born out of that. Because, of course, once Myrtle accomplished healing, other people took interest, right? They took note of that, and they started to draw to her like a moth around a flame. And they started to hold meetings in their home, study groups, prayer groups, whatever you want to call it, where people were trying to understand exactly what had happened to Myrtle. And one of the most interested people in her life at that point in what was going on was Charles Fillmore, her husband. And he decided that he would go what he liked to call directly to headquarters, meaning his phrase for meditation, that if there was this one presence and one power that had healed his wife at depth, that he too should be able to experience it. So he started meditating about 4 hours every day. And nothing happened for quite a while, but then he began to get this inspiration that came to him in his dreams. And a lot of those ideas were then shared with many through his publications, which the first being Modern Thought, a magazine that he first published in 1889. So that's sort of the facts, right, of how it all began. And certainly that concept of the small study group, the small group meeting in the Fillmore's homes, is something that you can still see today happening in Unity. It's how this church began back in 1996. For those of you who weren't with us, Arlene and I started this group in my home in Spencer. That first summer of 1996, a little group of us, Jane Richardson was there, raise your hand, Jane. And we started studying the techniques and the teachings of meditation. Right now in our own church, we've started another study group, right? The Spanish study group, studying the materials of Reverend Eric Butterworth, Discover the Power Within You, led by Carmen Scafidi. So that way of starting is still alive and well, yes? Yeah. So all of this is true. The facts are true. But what was really the vision of the co-founders, of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, when it comes to unity? Well, Charles and Myrtle had been lifelong true students. They didn't just wake up one day when a friend invited them to a New Thought lecture and went, wow. They had been studying all the major and minor spiritual philosophies of their day. Myrtle talked about early childhood mystical experiences when she was on her jaunts out in nature, where she would experience that one presence and one power of God. She knew that she was, in a sense, different than a lot of other people. She would talk about going to church picnics where everybody was around listening to the minister preach. Those were the days they all brought their baskets and had religious services out in the woods, but she would go out and play among the moss and the rocks and the hills and experience God herself. So she was a mystic from a very young age. And they both had this great love of Jesus and his teachings. But they both found that the current manifestation of the Christian church was not feeding their souls, feeding their spirits. It was missing the point of what they felt Jesus was saying and what he had brought in his teachings. So their ultimate vision was to discern this truth that they found not only in the teachings of Jesus, though primarily in those teachings, but believe me, they were influenced, as I mentioned recently in one of my talks, East Meets West, by many, many of the philosophies that they had studied. What they wanted to do was discern the truth and then teach it and share it with others. And to live it, to express it in their lives. And folks, this is exactly what Jesus did as well. Charles and Myrtle stepped out of the mainstream of Christianity. Well, what mainstream did Jesus step out of his day and age? What do you think? Judaism. Jesus did not abandon the Jewish teachings, but he interpreted them in a different and new way, no longer a stale way. He said, I'm not here to abolish the law, I'm here to what? To fulfill it. To breathe life into it. It's not about the letter of the law, but the what? The spirit of the law. So he came to discern and teach the truth of Judaism, the truth of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the truth of Moses and the Elijah legacy. He was about bringing this new interpretation to a very ancient philosophy. Just as the Fillmores were bringing a new interpretation to a newer philosophy, Christianity. But if you really discern what Christianity is about, doesn't it just cycle right back to that ancient philosophy of Judaism that Jesus was all about? And so we go back, and if we really look at what was the vision of both Jesus and the Fillmores, it was to share the universal truth principles as they understood them with their followers. I don't want to say the world, because Jesus wasn't about bringing this to the world. Who was about bringing it to the world? Paul. Did somebody say Paul? Yeah. Jesus had his little group, whoever showed up basically in his house. Remember the small study groups? Maybe not his house, but whoever his circle around him. Wherever he went, whether it was on a hillside or in a small village or by the sea, he would be teaching. But Paul was the one who wanted to spread it into greater lands, into Europe and so forth, beyond just the Jewish nations. And if you look at unity, who was very much like Jesus, do you think? Who wanted to teach and heal? Myrtle. And Charles was the Paul of our movement. He was the one that started the publications, and he went on the radio in his day and age and got the word out once there was radio, and he did every way possible to spread the good news. And so